costs more to do everything right now, including care.
So how many patients do you have here?
24.
24.
In this hospice near Falkirk, looking after patients, feeding them, washing their sheets, it's all become much more expensive to do because of energy costs, and fundraising only goes so far.
Well, they've had a massive impact because they've put all our costs up. So the direct cost of utilities has gone up by about 40,000. The cost of utilities in all our shops has gone up, so the profit goes down.
You rely on donations from the public. About 2/3 of your income is from donations. I guess your fear is that if people are struggling to pay their own energy bills, they're not going to donate.
How can you expect people, if they're feeling broke, then this is a discretionary spend, isn't it? So they just can't afford to do it.
Those of us who are struggling, the subject at a Westminster committee earlier.
Low-income households are paying the price for a broken energy market here.
Citizens' Advice warning people who've failed to pay bills and been moved onto prepayment meters have been finding it hard to top up during winter. It's estimated more than 3 million people in Britain ran out of credit last year, the equivalent of 1 every 10 seconds.
A number of very vulnerable households were disconnecting regularly and for extended periods of time, and that included people who, disabled people or people with a long-term health condition. So we've called for a temporary, a moratorium on the forced installation of prepayment meters until we can put some new protections in place.
This financial advisor says people need to ensure they're getting the support they're entitled to, because while things seem to be improving, there's still uncertainty for the energy market.
We've actually had a relatively mild winter, which means we haven't used as much energy across Europe as we expected. So supplies are quite good, the prices are starting to fall, but there are so many variable factors in this, including what happens in the war in Ukraine and with Russia and sanctions, but also what happens now China is coming out of COVID and is opening up more, and their demand on energy.
Whether it's paying our own bills or the costs of running a charity, in these colder months we're feeling the heat and the pressure will continue for some time. Alan Jenkins, 5 News.
Let's talk about strikes, because tomorrow is set to be one of the busiest days of them in over a decade. Our chief correspondent, Tessa Chapman, as you can see, joins us in the studio. Tessa, just how big are these walkouts going to be?
They're big. There are 7 unions taking part, and an estimated 500,000 workers could be walking out. Let's take a look at who's going on strike. At the top there, we've got teachers. This is the first of 7 days of action in England and Wales. Rolling strikes are continuing in Scotland. University lecturers will be walking out too, plus train drivers from 14 operators, bus drivers in London, some security guards and civil servants too, about 100,000 in total. And that's going to impact driving test centres, ports and airports, job centres and museums, among others.
So schools is a really big one you touched on there, and it's hard in some cases to find out if your school is actually going to be open.
Yeah, exactly. The latest estimates are that around 14 or 15% of schools will be closed entirely. That's from a teacher survey, but it's tricky because teachers aren't currently obliged to tell their head if they're definitely going to walk out on strike. Many have, but there is still a possibility that there will be some schools that just have to make that decision tomorrow morning. I've been speaking to lots of schools today. Some are going to be fully open, others partially closed. Some might combine classes for the day. You might find there are movie afternoons in the school hall, for example. Ultimately, it's the discretion of the head, and it's tricky. I spoke to Seamus Murphy, who runs 3 primaries and 2 secondaries. He knows 80 of his staff are striking in Kent. He says it could even be more.
In the secondaries, we are keeping Year 7 and Year 11 and Year 13, but providing vulnerable sort of in-school support for vulnerable children of key workers, and anyone else who makes representation to us. We obviously also doing online learning, but it's not live lessons.
So that's schools. We're going to put a little ticker on the bottom of your screen right now because we need to talk about trains, and as you can see, there's quite a lot of disruption to come.
Yeah, these are all the train operators that aren't going to be running any services at all. So take a look at those. There are some that will be trying to. We're expecting around 30% of all services to be operating, but as we know now, there is a lot of disruption either side. So the message is the same, it's check before you travel.
And on top of all that, there's expected protests as well, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It probably won't cause disruption, but the TUC is organising nationwide events as well as those picket lines. This is all about the government's controversial plans for this new law implementing minimum service levels during strikes. And I'm afraid this isn't the end of it, because don't forget, next week is a really big one. Monday is going to be the biggest strike day in the NHS. We've got nurses and ambulance workers walking out, so lots of disruption to come.